The top boss at ANZ, Shane Elliott, has claimed this morning that Victoria is the worst state in Australia to do business. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Is it tougher to do business in Victoria?
Well, it's certainly not getting easier. I mean, we're
worse than the rest of the country.
It's one of the toughest places. I mean, look at the payroll tax. I mean, I have a personal view. I mean, payroll. Why are we taxing something that's good? So we're taxing employers for giving people jobs, and not only are we taxing it, it's at a pretty big rate. I mean, the amount of money. So that increase alone will cost us $20-30 million. Now, a lot of people out there say, well, boo-hoo for you, big bank, and I get that. But the reality is that those costs ultimately, let's not kid ourselves, they ultimately get paid for by consumers.
So Victoria is going to jack up the payroll tax by 0.5% for big businesses in Victoria. ANZ is looking to acquire Suncorp, and they're saying if they do that, well, they'll probably just ship a shed load of jobs up to Queensland.
Well, they'd be mad not to. I mean, I'm an employer, Caleb. My business will clock up 20 years next week, I think. Better get onto that. too busy dealing with pandemics and interstate moves. But, as an employer, I want to give him a hug down, a politically appropriate hug, of course, down the camera. But when you're taxing businesses...
Run that by HR.
I know. Welcome behaviour, etc., etc. But if you look and you speak to businesses in Victoria, it's this extraordinary sort of mindset where people seem to believe, and the majority of people seem to love Daniel Andrews. He's still in office, God knows why, but not everybody can work for the public sector, and you've got this state that is in deep in debt, and to the point that, look, I'm old enough to remember the Kane Kearney years. I'm old enough to remember how that ended, and my personal view is that at some point there will be a reckoning, because there has to be a reckoning. You cannot have the entire state of Victoria working for the public sector. You cannot have, there are options. People in Australia have options to take their businesses to jurisdiction. Let me give you an example. Your home state of South Australia. How well's that bloke going? He's playing a blinder. But that's my point. I mean, I'm a Liberal voter. I think Peter Malinauskas is doing an absolutely cracking job. If you look at him as, a centre-left Labor Premier, he's sensible. Yeah. He's doing things to make South Australia attractive as a tourist destination. He is communicating the right message. If I was the ANZ acquiring Suncorp, I would 100% be doing the same thing. It's cost of business, because ultimately you and I pay for it.
Indeed. And just quickly before we go, apparently 23 million calls were made from payphones last year. Now, they're not payphones anymore.
As in public phones?
Indeed, yeah, they're not payphones anymore, because you can make the calls for free.
As in the ones Superman used to get changed in?
That's right, the little orange ones. Well, they use them as billboards now. But apparently the use of public phones has surged to 23 million calls in the last year. But it seems to have been made up primarily of people making calls to outfits like Lifeline, for instance. So presumably it's
and they are
homeless
free,
people and people who can't afford to use a phone.
23 million, though.
It's quite a sad indictment, though, isn't it, that people are that desperate to get on the phone to Lifeline?
I must say, yes, of course it is. I must say, though, I can't actually remember the last time I saw a public phone. I genuinely can't. I can remember there's one near where I used to live in Perth, and I'm not sure it's functional, but since moving to Sydney a year and a half ago, I actually couldn't tell you where there is a public phone.
Well, I used to have one at the front of my place in Melbourne, and I can tell you what, some of the conversations I overheard on that phone were very interesting. And the thing actually rings. It was great. It was endless entertainment. You could intercept people's phone calls.
That's a conversation for another day, I think.
Gemma Tognini, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.